Today, I'll be creating custom Magic the Gathering cards based on Persona 5. Joker, the Trickster is a 5/5 legendary human rogue for 3 green and a blue with Reach, 2 mana, Joker. The Trickster gains all abilities of target creature until end of turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. Joker's card is built mainly around his wild card ability, which allows him to swap between personas at will. To represent this in Magic, I decided to make it so the different persona abilities can be represented by the different creatures on the battlefield, and thus he can change his abilities to each quote-unquote persona accordingly. The most useful way to use this is by giving him utility effects or effects where you want to double it up. So if you want to protect him, giving him hexproof until end of turn. If you want to swing in for damage, give him infect until end of turn. This card is very similar to Lazav the Multifurious, but instead of just cards in your graveyard, it's cards all over the battlefield. And on top of that, it also doesn't have the mana restrictions that Lazav has. I think where it becomes really powerful is when you double it up with even stronger effects. So stuff like Nazahal Primal Tide lets you draw 2 cards off a non-creature spell. Arcanus the Omnipotent is another example of a great card draw effect, and also Annihilator triggers with stuff like If That Betrays or any of the Eldrazi Titans are all going to be great. Overall, he's a lot of utility, and I also think he'd be a fun full strong commander because you have a lot of utility that you can mess around with. Hifumi, Queen of Shogi, is a 3/3 legendary human advisor for 4 green and a blue with pay 1 and a green and tap, return a creature you control to its owner's hand. You may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Hifumi's Confidant is very important because it unlocks the ability for you to swap out party members mid-battle on your turn. This is an incredibly useful in-game ability because it basically quadruples your health bars, being able to cycle through party members and use their effects when needed. To represent this in Magic, I decided to use a Master Transmuter-esque effect where you're able to swap out creatures for the creatures that you want. So if you have a Sakura Tribe out, you could swap it out for a Blightsteel Colossus, which is very powerful. I do think you can build a really fun commander deck around her if you wanted to though. She works great with fast ramp and very expensive creatures that you can get out early. Stuff like Blightsteel Colossus that I've mentioned a million times already, Galta, Phyllis, Broker of Blood, the list goes on. There's a ton of very powerful high mana creatures that you can get out a lot earlier. Ryuji, Headstrong Rogue, is a 5/5 legendary human rogue for 3 black and a red with whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, if blocking creature has toughness less than attacking creature's power, destroy blocking creature. Now, while the text is very complicated, I do think it represents Ryuji very well. Everybody who's played Persona 5 knows that Ryuji is probably one of the most useful party members in the game. Not only because he has high damage in combat, but also because of his Confidant ability, Insta-Kill. Ryuji's ability lets you insta-kill lower level shadows to avoid you having to actually do a meaningless fight when you really don't need to. To represent this in Magic, I made it so you can basically destroy low power creatures that you're not really worth fighting. I made it so if your creature has higher toughness than the defending creature's power, it kind of represents you as a party being at a high level and the enemy shadow being at a very low level, so not really worth your time. Ryuji works best with high-powered creatures for very efficient costs, so stuff like Phyrexian Soulgorger, Rotting Register, and Lightning Skelemental are all great here because they're low, early-cost creatures that you can get down very quickly, but also have incredibly high power. This also gets around Death Touch, which is very strong, as Death Touch is a very strong blocking ability. All Out Attack is a sorcery for white with Destroy All Tap Creatures. In Persona 5, whenever you're able to knock down all the enemies, you have the option to trigger the All Out Attack, which lets you do a ton of damage to all the enemies at once. To represent this in Magic, I made it so the quote-unquote downed enemies are represented as tap creatures, as that's probably the closest thing. This spell works great on your phase because usually you're not going to tap your creatures before doing this, but your opponents will. However, it is limited because, you run into a lot of cases where it's not super advantageous for your opponents to tap your creatures, hence why it's a fairly low cost board wipe. This works very similar to cards like Guan Yong's 1000 Li March, Sunblast Angel, and Righteous Fury, and it goes great with effects that tap down all your opponent's creatures. So stuff like Bond of Disciple, Sleep, and Subjugator Angel are all great here. Takemi, Back Alley Doctor, is a legendary human cleric that starts as a 1/1 for white mana with level up for 1 and a white. For levels 1 through 4, Takemi has, if you would gain life, you gain that much life plus 1 instead, and is a 2/2. And then once it reaches level 5, you get, if you would gain life, you gain triple that much life instead. In Persona 5, Takemi is your main source of healing items, and as you raise your confidant over time, you get stronger and stronger healing items. To represent this in Magic the Gathering, I decided to give the idea that over time you're going to get stronger and stronger life gain as you level up her quote-unquote confidant, in this case just being her actual card. Obviously this goes great with other life gain synergies, so stuff like Grey Merchant of Asphodel, Aloral, Ageless Aesthetic, and Aetherflux Reservoir are always great. And also, because this is a level up card, you're going to want abilities that lower the cost, so stuff like Hearthstone, Zerta the Dawnwaker, and Training Grounds are all great and lets you hit that final ability even sooner. On top of that, this idea of tripling effects is something that hasn't been seen in late, and I'd like to see it explored here. While Life Game is definitely a slower game ability, I do think it works pretty well here. Akechi, Psychotic Detective, is a 5/5 human assassin for 3 black and a red with haste. Tap, goad target creature. And goaded creatures get +2/+2 and first strike. For Akechi, I decided to mainly build him around his special ability to turn people psychotic. And the closest way to represent being psychotic in Magic the Gathering would probably be goading creatures, as it causes them to act irrationally. On top of that, I also made it so he buffs goaded creatures, just like how in-game when he turns himself psychotic, he gets increased combat strength. I think this is probably the most similar to card art the Doomscar, which is the quintessential make your opponents attack each other commander. I think Akechi works well here and creates a kind of goad tribal idea. And of course, this is going to go great with other goading synergies, stuff like Disrupt Decorum, Bloodthirsty Blade, and Lorraine the Diversion, all going to go great. I think this represents Akechi's abilities pretty well and creates an interesting new deck that I haven't really seen before. And that's all the cards I have for today. Thank you for watching.